Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for uh, giving us this housekeeping, and for letting people know the different accessibility requirements. Folks, you're really welcome to week 5 of our webinar series, where we're going to explore the topic and theme of storytelling and the importance of our memories. We have some incredible speakers lined up for today's session. It's my job to introduce you to the facilitator for this particular session, a very good friend of mine. Fadi Salhaddin is the Community Engagement and University Collaboration Coordinator for the For Youth by Youth movement, responsible for building bridges between communities, universities, making meaningful partnerships happen and shaping the movement's culture. He is interested in the holistic interaction between social psychology and technological organizational development to address pressing social issues like misinformation, political polarization, and social injustices. Fadi believes in youth empowerment and education's role in creating transformative change. Fadi's involvement in civic engagement led him to be selected for the Talwires Network of Engaged Universities Next Generation Leaders Program as part of the Civic Engagement's Futures Group. Fadi is currently pursuing a Master's in Management called Specializing in Strategic Management at the HEC Paris, and holds an MSc in Social Cognition from University College London. And also alongside this, a BA in Psychology from the American University of Beirut. He is the recipient of numerous full scholarship awards like the US Department of State MEPI Tomorrow's Leaders Awards, the Side Foundation Awards, and the Imagine Fellowships Awards, in addition to several ones in academic excellence and community service. And I think that beyond the accolades and the university education that Fadi has explained in his bio, he also has a huge amount of lived experience in the use of storytelling in shaping not only youth spaces, but also having really difficult and challenging conversations at time, but important conversations. And I'm very lucky to call him one of my best friends. So, Fadi, over to you to introduce our speakers for today.
All right. Can you see my screen? I'm sharing.
We can.
All right, perfect. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and welcome to the 5th session of the For Youth by Youth Conscious Leadership webinar series. And today's topic is going to be storytelling and the importance of our memories. I would like to start the session by asking you, why do you tell your stories? And feel free to type in the chat any thoughts that come to you, and we can come back to this later. But for now, storytelling is really one of the oldest forms of communication. It is the art of conveying events, ideas, emotions, and experiences. Through storytelling, not only do we share who we are, but we share our experience of the world. And it's not just about recalling the past, but about making sense of it and finding meaning in it and passing it on. And I'd like to share with you a quote that I really like by Toni Morrison. It says, "Narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment that it is being created." And storytelling can take many different forms, be it through words, images, sound, or any other form of expression. But at the essence of it, it is the intimate and powerful experience of sharing not just our memories, but our piece of our existence. This takes me to the important question of, like, why is storytelling important? And this will set the tone for the discussion that we're going to have with our speakers. The first point is really our personal stories are our identities. And psychologists actually argue that our identity forms not as a static unit, but as a narrative, which gives our lived experiences some continuity, shape, and scope. So creating and sharing our stories is a powerful assertion of one's own identity. The second point is that stories are really imbued with emotion, meaning, and value, which makes them a very powerful tool for social connection. Specifically, stories really give us a chance to move from the individual lived experience to an assertion about the universal human condition. And it allows us to connect on a very intimate, deep, and human level. This takes me to the third point, which really relates to a topic that was discussed previously in the webinar series, which is collective solidarity. And stories really drive cross-border solidarities across generations, geographies, and social groups, simply by allowing us to relate to one another and see one another. It creates a sense of responsibility, but also creates the drive and motive to act on it. Also, in a world with a plurality of truth, telling our stories is an act of resilience against hegemonic forms of knowledge. As we discussed in a previous session, how important it is to collaborate with Indigenous partners when creating knowledge, and how storytelling is a powerful tool for knowledge production and for knowledge sharing. And the final point is that stories help shape our collective memories and collective meaning, which is our shared recollections and interpretations of events or narratives, and practically our interpretation of the world we live in. The interesting thing is that collective memory is not really a static archive of facts, but a living, breathing narrative that we socially construct together through different forms of communication and shared experiences and relatedness. And we can really leverage storytelling and collective memories and collective meaning in order to act together. This takes me to the second quote, which is by the founder of the collective memory theory, that says, "We're never alone when we remember. Our memory is always connected to the memories of others." And this last point really is powerful and relates directly to For Youth by Youth, specifically in relation to conscious leadership and movement building. We can never be leaders in silos, and storytelling gives us the tools to break out of our silos and to, whether it be them geographical, economic, digital, or what have you. And finally, I believe as I'm setting the scene for this conversation, it's my duty of care to mention that examining memories and stories can become challenging at times, especially the ones that we inherit and the ones that are imposed on us, and the ones that become a source of unconscious prejudice that's entrenched within our psyche. For example, I personally come from a fractured and war-scarred society where memories of unhealed trauma, intergroup violence, and sectarian divide still boil under the surface, whether in the context of Lebanon or Syria, where I'm originally from. And most recently, we really saw how that can burst into collective action at any moment. Not the type of collective action that we're trying to foster in this space, but one of a more violent nature. We also saw in recent years how storytelling can reinforce colonial structures and exclusionary narratives. We see this through the control of mainstream media narratives and the spread of fake news and hate speech. So I bombarded you with a lot of ideas to reflect on. Taking this into consideration, I want us to reflect on how youth-led grassroots storytelling can become a force for liberation and a way to foster solidarity, connectedness, and collective action to challenge the status quo. So think of the role that your stories and memories play within this wider context, and think of stories not only as tools to build narratives, but also as tools to rupture through existing ones. And where does this leave us? I will give you some time to reflect on all of this, but in the meantime, I have the pleasure of presenting today's speakers, with whom I'm very excited to have this conversation. First, we have Promise. Promise holds a BA degree in International Relations from the University of Banda and has earned certification in International Business Administration from Germany. Promise was recently appointed as an innovation champion for local economic development at the Institute of Rural Development at the University of Banda. In addition to his academic and professional pursuits, Promise is deeply committed to civic engagement through his social entrepreneurship venture, which is called Stru Arts Entertainment. And he is our very own For Youth by Youth consultant on storytelling and visual arts. Our second speaker is Mercy. Mercy was born and raised in Cameroon. Growing up in rural community, she made a personal commitment to address pressing community challenges. Her dedication led her to co-found two NGOs focused primarily on delivering community benefits. And since joining the Redemption Higher Institute of Biomedical Sciences in her home country, Mercy has experienced remarkable growth. The institution's emphasis on student leadership and active community involvement inspired her to launch her micro health insurance scheme. And her initiative not only promotes and maintains health among students, but also helps raise capital to empower them. Mercy is currently continuing her impactful work with the For Youth by Youth movement as a consultant. And our third speaker is going to be Hamid, who is an EdTech leader, TEDx speaker, poet, author, and social entrepreneur with a deep passion for education and youth empowerment. Hamid's story is inspiring, to say the least. He was raised in Makoko, Africa's largest floating slum, and having lost his mother at a young age, Hamid's early life challenges shaped his unwavering commitment to transform lives through education. He began teaching at the age of 15 in rural Lagos and founded the Kiyode Alabi Leadership and Career Initiative, which has trained over 10,000 underserved youth. He served at Peace First, where he supported youth-led change in over 150 countries, and has also addressed more than 100 ministers of education at the UNESCO pre-summit of the Transforming Education Summit. He is also the founder of Skill to Rural organization, an edtech platform delivering career and life skills to rural and displaced youth. And most recently, he launched an innovative initiative called Rafiki AI, Africa's first generative AI career advisor for underserved youth using WhatsApp. And last but not least, we have Deborah, who is the communications and tech professional with over 15 years of experience, leading projects, campaigns, and teams across Africa. Her work focuses on technology adoption within low-income communities, where she applies her deep expertise in customer success, communications, and business to develop human-centered and user-centric solutions. Deborah is also the founder of Positive Circles, an initiative driven by her passion for equipping women with the skills and knowledge to make better life choices. And she also brings a strong track record of partnership development and program design. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Once again, Promise, Mercy, Hamid, and Deborah, thank you very much for joining us. As we build For Youth by Youth as a youth-led movement to empower young people to tell their stories, I would like to start my conversation with you along the lines of two questions. How can storytelling be utilized to amplify marginalized voices, foster partnerships, drive social movements, and inspire conscious leadership among youth? And how do you envision the role of collective memory in driving progress and positive youth-led transformation? I'll start with Promise. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Fadi. Thank you for the great intro. I'm currently at a hotel. I just checked in. Can I just have the second speaker to go, and then I can go after them?
All right.
Just so I said.
All right. Maybe we can start with Mercy then.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Fadi, Carlton, and Cameron for setting the stage. I'm happy to be here today to be able to talk about storytelling, to share my own little story, and to also learn from the great minds on the call. So, storytelling is one of the most transformative tools that brings about change. In the world today, looking back to our education system worldwide, we all study history in school. At some point, when you're studying history, you could feel like, why are they just telling us the story? But when you put all together, you discover that the stories that are being shared in the world, excuse me, the stories that are being shared somehow resonate with you in a different location and resonates with someone in another location. So storytelling is actually a tool for total transformation in the world. Storytelling builds confidence. There are things or steps you want to take in life, that you feel, where do I start from? But you are not alone. Someone did it before. Someone is still going to do it after you. What gives you that confidence? Going back to dig the stories of others. Did somebody do this thing like me? What were the challenges they faced? What strategies did they use? What is it that worked for them? Did somebody go through the kind of pain that is happening in my country? If I did talked of war, is another country going through that kind of war? How did they navigate it? If they have peace today, how did they get to that? So storytelling builds the confidence to face situations and to forge through. Storytelling dismisses misinformation. When you tell stories or when you dig back into stories, you get to know the truth, especially cultural stories. When we were growing up, I remember my grandmother used to gather us around the fireplace to tell us stories, and sometimes she says some in our local language. And those stories today, I tell them to my own children. And I try to make them to master some things in the story because the parts where she wants us to repeat in the local language, those are the things that makes us to, my brothers and sisters, we remember those stories, remember her, and we laugh about it. Those are beautiful memories she created. But what were the lessons we gained from her stories? Those lessons we carry along. So stories dismiss misinformation because sometimes I hear something and then about a certain culture, and I want to go to their story, like, what is their history? What has happened there before? When I get into their history, you get to know if this information is actually true or not. And does it resonate with me coming from another culture? Because most of the time, stories will resonate with people. Since we are all humans, it may be different in your locality, but there are some key points that are going to tie. And storytelling creates emotional connections. Sometimes when you hear the stories of people, you get emotionally connected to them. You were not there, but there is this pain that someone has gone through, and you feel like, I share in your pain. I try to imagine and put myself in your pain. It gives you that emotional connection, and it creates empathy in your heart and ignites a feeling of solidarity, like we need to be united. Only storytelling can do these things for us. So I don't want to take all the time. I'll come back to you, Fadi, and pass on to the next panelist on the call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mercy. And I totally agree in relation to how storytelling is connecting on the most deep human level, using emotions and empathy, and it builds solidarity. Thank you. Now I'm moving the floor to you, Hamid.
Yeah, thanks, Fadi. It's great to be here and, great to see familiar faces as well. Whenever I am asked to talk about storytelling or probably to answer the question you've asked, which is, how do we, create these collective stories? I think it starts with a personal story. I think we have to start with our own personal story. And I think I'm going to share my own personal story as an entry point, into this conversation or into the question that has been posed. In 2004, Barack Obama gave a speech that actually made him a president at the end of the day. And in that speech, Barack Obama said, "My story is part of the larger American story. And I owe a debt to all of those that came before me that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. My story is part of the larger African story. And I owe a debt to all of those that came before me that in no other continent on earth is my story even possible." I was born and raised in the largest floating slum in Africa, Makoko, Nigeria. Lost my mom when I was 7, and my dad became unemployed at the same time. I stayed out of school for our academic term, and it was the same for my brother, who stayed out of school for academic year, until I attended a program for vulnerable children when I was 14. This program introduced me to self-esteem and leadership. And I could recall then that I learned that self-esteem is the way you see yourself and the way you see the world, and the way you handle yourself and the way you handle the world. I was so inspired that I started engaging young people in my community. And from engaging over 3,000 young people, I noticed that only 1 in 10 young people would have access to the necessary life and 21st century skills needed to change their circumstances, integrate into the workforce, and prepare for the future of work. In fact, when we look at the continent, we notice that there are 100 million underserved and displaced young people who share similar circumstances, such as myself. And I decided to do something about that. And that's why I started Skillsura Bootcamp, where these young people not only identify problems within their communities, but co-create solutions to them using design thinking. And as they co-create solutions, they develop 21st century skills along the line, such as critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and creativity, which are skills needed for the workforce. I also created an edtech platform where these young people can actually have access to some of these courses as well and continue to develop the skills that they need to change their circumstances. Life starting point is a lottery, but the future of children like myself should not be left to chance. Again, that was a personal story, that was a pitch. I believe that every young person has to have that storytelling pitch, right? What's that introduction? What's that your story? What's that your pitch? Because the reason why somebody will support you is not because of the amazing innovation you've created. It's because of the story you tell. I mean, you could create all of the edtech platform, amazing solution, incredible solution, but people will only follow you because of your story and how they are connected to that story. Currently, we have over 200 volunteers in my organization. And if you ask them, why did you just join this organization? They will tell you it's because of my story. So the first thing I would like to talk to you about in terms of driving partnership or getting other people to support your work is to have a story pitch. So what's your story pitch? Have you developed one? If you don't have one today, this is an opportunity for you to actually develop a story pitch. And that story pitch will give you an entry point into your story and into your work. And I can tell these stories in almost 5 different ways. But I'm just telling you this one way to show you an entry point into story. And again, you will notice that I shared a story maybe probably in 1 minute. I wasn't saying a lot of things, right? So again, what's your story? The fact that it's your story doesn't mean you understand it. It might be your story. It doesn't mean you know how to tell your story. So it's very important for you to distinguish what is your story and what is storytelling. Even though your story is connected to storytelling, sometimes they can be different as well. So let me tell you why. One, it's your story. I've had really, really terrible experience in the slum. I've nearly been lynched, for stealing a phone before. I was nearly burnt in the streets, but I didn't tell that story. There were many things that has happened, right? In my journey, but I wasn't talking about those stories. So what I did was to pick the important part of my story and then tell them, right? So it's very important for you to distinguish story and storytelling. So what's your story? You have all of those stories. Then separate it from the storytelling as well, because storytelling itself is an art of telling the story. So the first step to actually understand, to tell your story is to understand it. So do you actually understand your story? And how do you actually even understand your story to start with, right? One of the ways to understand your story, there's this, I came across I kind of came about a kind of a storytelling process. So that's what we call story awareness, right? So first you have to start with knowing your story. So how do you know your story? You're either having a conversation with a friend, there's a way where you're sitting down with one person. Most of the time people think, oh, storytelling is actually coming to social media to share. I'm like, no, it's a different thing entirely. It's not about coming to social media to share, even though social media is an avenue to tell your story. Sometimes storytelling is actually having a conversation with a friend. And by having that conversation with a friend, you're actually processing that story. You're trying to understand that story. You're trying to understand, what should I tell or what should I not tell? Because not every story that you tell. In fact, I've seen some people who have shared their story and they ended up committing suicide. I mean, I don't wish that for anybody, but because they told that story, so you have to understand the story before you tell it. You have to even understand the consequences of the story before you tell the story, because stories also have consequences. And you have to understand the consequences of that story. And you have to be ready for those consequences. So if I'm coming out to share some certain stories, I've already accounted for the consequences of those stories as well. So it's very important for you to understand what does storytelling means, that storytelling is not broadcasting. Storytelling is vulnerability. It's sitting down with a friend and sharing with a friend that this is what I'm going through. And by sharing with that friend, you're now connecting the dots and you're understanding the story. You're like, okay, this is a place where I don't want to tell. I don't want to share this with the public yet. I'm not ready. Oh, this is the part I want to share with the public. This is the part I want to share in my page. This is the part that's important in terms of like my work and in terms of partnership, because you don't want to go into a partnership room and you're sharing your life story, everything. You want to be able to share the part of the story that is important, right? So I think that's something I want to say, understanding your story. And also like, there's also something about shared story as well. What's the story of us? You've told your story of self, but what's the story of us? What's that shared story, right? A shared story is when you sit down and actually listen to other people's story. And how do you ground those other story into your story, right? And I used to say something that you can own a story in another person's story. You can own a vision in another person's vision. You can own a mission in another person's mission. In fact, you don't have to be a founder to actually tell a story or own a story or to even create something. So what's your story within, the space you work in? What's that story? What are you, like right now, we're actually living a story. Like listening to me, listening to Fadi, listening to Messi, you're living a story. You're thinking about a story. You're like living, like every single day we live a story. We live story every single day, every single minute, every single seconds. Like we live stories. The reason why people say that I don't have a story to tell is probably that you're not present, or either you're not even listening to yourself, or either you're not reflecting to, within yourself. Like if you're reflecting, you know that, oh, there's actually a story to tell. And again, that's where the collective memory comes from, right? How are you reflecting on the story of yourself? How are you reflecting on the story of your family? How are you reflecting on the story of your community? How are you reflecting on the story of the people that you're meeting every single day? And that's how we are grounded and we're able to tell a shared story. And that's why somebody will say that I'm ready to die for this person because this person connects to me. I feel connected to their story. But not only do I feel connected to their story, I feel like I can see my story in their story. And because of that, they were like, okay, I feel connected. I'm ready to die for this cause. I'm ready to die for this movement, right? Again, I don't want to take much of our time and go into like some, ideas or ideas or theories around storytelling, but I'll probably just stop here. And I'm really looking forward to the story I get to like hear in the breakout rooms, and hopefully we can share stories together and learn from each other and kind of like ground each other, because storytelling is also grounding each other, right? So I'm looking forward to how we get to like ground each other in our stories. And thank you.
Thank you, Hamid, and thank you for highlighting the different facets of stories and storytelling, from defining our own identities into negotiating our shared reality through all these stories. So thank you very much. Deborah, I'll move the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Fadi. Thank you, Masi and Hamid, for sharing your thoughts. For me, I'll just start by saying that I'm an African, and Africans have long been known for storytelling, and it was a whole institution where we had griots who held stories of families and history, and they used song and dance, and. But Africa has, and modern Africa has been painted in such bad light, and other people are telling our stories. And the stories are not always positive. Many times we've seen the negative side of Africa. So I'm really happy that there's a new renaissance coming where we as Africans are able to tell our stories, which are real. Because sometimes when it comes to storytelling, you have to understand that it's a whole economy. And whoever tells the best story holds power, is able to attract money. Hamid has talked about funding. So we also have to be very careful how we tell our stories, what parts we select. And for me, just to answer the question of how can we amplify marginalized voices, how can we inspire conscious leadership through storytelling? And I'm just going to tell you a story of how I traveled to South Africa a few weeks ago. I think I traveled South Africa 5 weeks ago. And Nelson Mandela is such a great icon of mine. He's such a great icon of mine. And most people were like, don't go to Johannesburg. It's the most dangerous city in the world. So now you see that's a story of negative perception on a city that many people have not been into.
I was like, how can I go to South Africa without paying homage to one of my icons? I have to go and learn. The purpose of me going to Johannesburg was for history, was to understand apartheid, what happened. And when you see the apartheid and how in Africa, when in the 90s, all of us from Kenya to Nigeria, we were also mobilized by the stories that were coming out of South Africa, either through the press, either through the music, of Hugh Masekela and the rest. I was less than 10 years old, but I knew what was happening. So that act, Nelson Mandela was behind bars for 27 years, but his story was still alive. It still radicalized so many people. I use the word radicalized. So many people, I'm not talking about mobilized so many people from Mozambique who were able to give arms. So storytelling can be used to mobilize. It can be used to raise so much in someone that they want to act. The story of Mandela as a young lawyer, it inspired a lot of people, a lot of presidents at that time. Well, like if this person can do it, I can also do it. So when you hear stories of young people as young people, then someone in Malala, she was a young girl, then you say, oh, I can also do it. When you hear stories of other marginalized communities, oppressed communities, it raises awareness of you. So it's so important to share stories because it inspires people. When I was in the taxi, I kept talking to them. The first time you're there, I was, because of all the negativity, it was such a strange, like, outer body experience because I'm looking at everyone with suspicion. I'm looking at a white Caucasian South African man, and I'm looking at the black person, I'm like, so for me, I made it a point to interact with the taxi drivers. First of all, the first day we went with a guided tour because we wanted to be safe. And he was telling us, no, Johannesburg is safe. It's just like Nairobi. You have to be careful with XYZ, carry your phone well, look like you know where you're going. So what does that mean? That sometimes negative stories, they limit us from experiencing life. They limit us from having experiences that we would want to. So always ask the story. Always question the story. Try and find out the truth. I like South Africa because they've documented what happened. So what does that mean? Stories will help us not forget. May we never forget. So you go there and you see the injustices that were done, and you go back to your country, and it helps you also tell the story to other people. This happened. This is discriminatory. This is, what is happening around the world, divisive politics. We really need to look at the stories of those who lived before us and learn so many lessons. So I feel storytelling is so important to us. When we see other people, when we hear stories, it inspires us, it mobilizes us, it challenges negative beliefs. I got so challenged when I found that Johannesburg is a city that second day I could walk around with an Uber, just had to take precautions. So I would not have experienced as much as I would if I stayed fearful, and I would not have paid homage to a great icon of mine if I believed all the negative stories. So stories, they educate, they mobilize, they inspire, and they help us just to shift from what we're thinking negatively to a more positive state, which is something we all need. So thank you so much, and looking forward to more interaction on this. I'm going to be talking so much about Africa, because that's something I'm very passionate about. So thank you.
I mean, we're very happy to hear all about Africa, Thank you very much for what you shared, and thank you very much for your story. I really related to the point that you mentioned about when other people tell your story and how that act itself is impeding, and it's completely the opposite of empowering. And maybe we can elaborate in it during the discussion. Now I'm going to move to our last speaker, Promise. I can't see you on the screen, but if you're here, yes, feel free.
Yes. I'm using AirPods. I'm not sure if I'm audible enough. Sometimes they become a bit of a problem. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to all the panelists. I feel like the more I was listening, I was saying maybe this my delay in checking in was the universe just waiting for them to set the stage, because I feel like most of their introductions were just along the lines of what I wanted to share. But just to introduce myself, everyone, hello. My name is Promise Nyalungu. I'm a visual storyteller, art activist, and founder of Through Arts Entertainment, which is an organization born out of my personal journey as a young creative who lacked platforms to perform in rural South Africa. And I like the previous speaker has experienced most of these things that I will be talking about today. But today I use storytelling to amplify the voices of underserved communities, build youth movements, and drive social innovation. My love for storytelling began in primary school, but growing up in a township meant that there were no stages to dream on. And so what I did was I then created those stages. I started through arts to give rural and township-based creatives a platform, not just to perform, but to transform society. I've seen firsthand how storytelling, whether through theater, music, or film, can spark conversation, challenge norms, and unite people across differences. Like the previous speaker just explained a bit about the history of South Africa, and South Africa's liberation, most of it did not come because of freedom fighters. It came because of the arts. It came because of the stories that were being told. It came because of the music that was being shared. A lot of people could connect with the pain of the people through the arts more than they can connect with the activists who were fighting. So the arts actually helped create another arm of the liberation movement, of which this was the same that was witnessed with the story of Martin Luther King. Storytelling is more than just performance. It's consciousness. It teaches empathy. It nurtures vision. It most importantly it invites action. So for me, conscious leadership begins with listening deeply to the stories that shaped us and amplifying those that are often unheard. Hence, my mission in life has always been I will make sure that rural voices make it to a global stage, because they find themselves in an environment that has been historically created to make sure that they only end up there. And I've made sure that I create platforms to make sure that they also benefit from this great pie of storytelling. And I believe that we all have a story that can spark change. The challenge that we most face is building the systems and platforms that ensure those stories reach and move the world. And that's what drives me, and that's why I'm here today. And even the For Youth by Youth movement in itself, it was a movement that was centered around youth change, but through the deliberations that we had with the funders of this movement, with the youth from 18 different countries, we all agreed that what must be at the center of this must be our stories, the stories of our struggles, the stories of change, and the story about the vision of the world that we see. And currently, as the visual storytelling and media specialist, I'm working with the current cohort. I work with the NGL alumni in crafting these stories of making sure that we share with the world the stories of young people that are bringing change and are all about making the world a better place and making sure that they envision a future. And through these stories, we believe that we will bring action. And I'm looking forward to the deliberations today. I'm so excited. This is one area that I'm so passionate about. And like I said, I made it my mission that I will tell the stories of rural people on a global platform. And today it's happening. So thank you so much for having us and looking forward to the deliberations.
Thank you, Promise. And I really find the work that you do with your social entrepreneurship initiative of using like creative forms of expression as a tool to tell stories. And thank you for telling the story of our movement. I want to pose the first question to the panel. And I want to ask you, can you share examples where recalling collective memories through storytelling has strengthened community resilience or unity and like has moved the community to act collectively? and they can be personal or collective stories. And maybe we can start with Hamid, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a story to tell, and I would say that it was the story after I graduated from the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program. I think in 2021. Yeah, it was the story I shared. And most of the time when we think about storytelling, we also need to think about the hero of the story. And for me, that story was the story of my dad, right? And I told the story of my dad, as a kind of like an entry point, because I said my dad was born and raised in a polygamous family, and in a way, it's kind of like affected his education. So he couldn't go past high school education, but he promised that he would make sure that his kids, got the best of education. So even when he didn't have anything, my dad would actually exceed this in the streets, in the slum to ensure that, we pay our school fees. I could recall that even when I was out of school, you would see my dad actually like feeling really sad about that. And I kind of like used my dad's story as an entry point to then share, even my own story that, uh, you know, again, that was my dad's story. And I shared my mom's story as well, before he died when I was 7, before she died when I was 7, that my mom as well, when I was growing up, even though we don't have everything, I don't have to worry what to wear or what not to wear. And it's so sad to like lose that connection with my mom. And so it matters to me when I see young people who lose one or two of their parents, and they don't have access to education. That matters to me. It matters to me when I see a young person who is struggling to thrive and struggling to create things and make things happen. It matters to me when I see those young people. So, and I remember that I shared that story and it went like really, really viral. And, a lot of people reached out, a lot of people got inspired through that story. A lot of people who look like myself found courage from that particular story as well. And I think that's one way to dig into our own memories, to dig into our own, journey, to dig into our own experiences, to actually inspire other people. Because there were so many young people who reached out to me after sharing that story and who said like they never believed that they could study at University of Edinburgh or walk through that journey or walk through that access. And they're like, okay, now I believe in this because Ahmed has done it. It's possible that I can do it. Young people who have like, grew up in the slum, whether, lived in rural communities, those young people started reaching out. People who have lost their parents who feel like there's no hope. Because there's something about actually losing your parents or losing both of your parents, right? Sometimes you feel like there's no hope. Sometimes you don't even know how to grieve because one of the things that I also used to share is that sometimes grieving is a privilege. The fact that some of us who kind of like grew up in the slum, we don't have the opportunity to grieve because we have to walk out through our grief. I would say particularly myself, I've not even had the chance to grieve yet since I lost my mom because I'm like, I don't even have the audacity to sit down and say I want to grieve because I just have to work hard because I just have to continue or constantly actually prove myself. So again, when people like myself are thriving, we need to tell that positive stories as well. We need to share that story of processes. We need to show people that it is possible. Because it's very important that we don't just tell stories of our wins, we don't just tell stories of like our impacts. We also tell the stories of our processes too. Most of the time, people feel like, a negative story cannot be a positive story, but sometimes a negative story can be a positive story in the way we tell it. The fact that I lost my mom doesn't mean that even though it seems like a sad story, but it's also, how do we tell that story as well? How do we share that narrative, right? So I think it's very important for us to understand the nexus of storytelling as well as a means of like, shared as a as an opening to like shared stories, right? So the nexus is like, how do we make sad stories become positive stories? How do we make sad stories become good stories, right? And also the same thing is that positive stories can become sad stories as well in the way we tell it, right? So because you could say I'm the best in the world, I've won this, I've achieved this, degree, nobody can beat me kind of story. And we've had all of those stories today that didn't even inspire us. The stories that inspire us are the stories of processes, right? So again, positive stories can also inspire us. They can become good stories in the way we tell it. And I think that's why I think that understanding our stories are important, understanding, tapping into our own memories, tapping into our own history, to inspire us and to inspire us to create change. And it's also like grounded in my own way of storytelling as well, which I'm going to end with that. I love when Deborah was mentioning about, telling the African story and the danger of that single story, right? One of the things that I started doing, or the reason why I started sharing and telling my stories, but is because I want to contribute to the diversity of thought and inspiration. I think, the stories of young Black Africans are not still being told or spotlighted, because one of the things that I used to see is that, when people think about, inspiration, they look at white people as inspiration. I have nothing against white people, obviously. But what is that inspiration from a young Black African as well? So for me, I want to contribute to that diversity of thought and inspiration, right? And by sharing my story, I'm contributing to that thought. I want to be that alternative voice. And that's why I say that my story is an act of rebellion. So if I'm telling that story in a way that inspires other people, in a way that it shows Black young African kids somewhere on the continent that it's possible to dream, then I'll keep telling that story. And probably you'll get tired of me telling it. So I just want to also like share that as a way to like, end the conversation, and to also answer your question around tapping into our memory and tapping into, our collective story to actually bring other people to tell their own story or to inspire them to take action.
Thank you, Hamid. I see in the chat that we have a really good question about like how do we develop skills of telling our stories? How do we craft compelling stories? And as an addendum to that, how do we tell our stories in ways that go beyond the mainstream, just written or spoken, so that we're more inclusive of individuals who are more diverse on the neurological spectrum? Maybe I'll go to Deborah next, if you could address this question. You're muted, Deborah.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Hamid. I believe the story, the conversation is on the examples, and I'm really torn between two examples. So I'm going to step away a bit from the political. I wanted to give a political example, especially with the Saba Saba movement here in Kenya, which Saba Saba means 7-7. So every July 7th, we commemorate, there was a big political rally. Remember when our former president, President Moi, he was in power for 24 years, and there was agitation for the second liberation, and student leaders, young people especially, were at the forefront of the movement, and civic society, lawyers, workers. And they went to Kamukunji, which is a local like stadium, and there were speeches, just the usual. And there was tear gas, and there was police, and everyone was scattered. This must have been in 1990, so I was still under 10. But every year, stories in the newspapers, interviews. So even up till today, we still commemorate Saba Saba. So what does that remind us? It reminds us that so many years ago, it must be now heading 30-something years ago, young people, ordinary people, professionals, people of all walks of life, they commemorated there. And it was one of the lead-ups to toppling that regime. So when we retell stories, then we are telling people that it's possible to do this thing. You remember that day? We did it. Now I'm telling you again, we can still do it. That's one example. The second example is where I worked. I was working in tech. A new product, just imagine you're in tech, it's in Africa, you're targeting low income. It was a product targeting low income communities and encouraging the small businesses to use tech. And we're running into so many problems. And in a company setting, in a corporate setting, if you are making too many mistakes, then you're probably being penalized. But I really love the culture that our leaders came up with, which was called reframing, not calling them failures, but calling them learning. So every month we'll be asked, what are your learnings this month? And I remember sometimes I would compile almost 15 mistakes I've made. And my boss, my CEO always told me, those are not mistakes, those are learnings. And we're going to file them and catalog them so that we know what not to repeat. So that was a collective memories that we were sharing across the organization. It was a funded project. We started compiling those to our funder. And even through that, was able now also because they were heavily invested in the tech ecosystem. So sharing stories is not just about, it's always not the way Hamida says, not only about sharing positive, it's also about compiling and sharing the negative so that we may be better, we may grow better, we may be better, and we may learn. So it could also be used heavily in a setting, in corporate settings, apart from just other normal settings. So those are the two examples that come to mind on collective stories and how they can transform.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to move to Mercy. Can you tell us of how can we develop skills and tell our stories, and how to craft compelling stories? Maybe Mercy or Promise, feel free.
All right. Thank you once more, Fadi. Thank you, Deborah and Hamed, for all the insights you've shared thus far. So when Hamed was sharing his story about his father, it took me to the story of my mother. And in the beginning, I said, when we share stories, they resonate with one another. We are humans and we are somehow connected. I remember how my mother went through her struggles to ensure that we went to school and to the best schools. So there's this little story I want to share before getting to your question, Fadi, is when I got to start doing nursing, in the community where I found myself, there are so many universities. I live in Buea in Cameroon, and Buea is like a hub for universities. And while I was in school, you discover that many students live from far, they leave their homes, they come to school, they rent houses around. And sometimes students fall sick and they are not able to treat themselves. But there are little things that they could do, which no one has told them yet. So that is what led me to come up with the health insurance scheme. And when I came up with this health insurance scheme, what did they have to do? You register with 10,000 francs, and when you are sick, we treat you for free. We send you to the hospital, pay all your bills. Now, can we really treat you with 10,000 francs? No. So how are we going to help you with your 10,000 francs? We need to make sure you don't fall sick. How do we make sure you don't fall sick? We start doing health talks, information session. We organize cleanup campaigns in the hostels where students stay. We ensure that we partner with organizations that share mosquito nets to students, and we ensure that there are maybe monthly or weekly checks, surprise checks to ensure you're sleeping under those nets, and maybe from time to time, when there is a campaign for prophylaxis, we'll give. And you discover that it actually reduced the number of students who were falling sick. It improved the health of the community, and it will answer the question of community resilience, like holistically, we all fought that without spending actually the real money we're supposed to spend. We spent, but not like we're going to spend. So to be able to write or frame or say authentic stories, what are the things you need to know? The first thing is the goal of the story. Who am I talking to? What is the attention grabber of your story? Your story should have a main character. That is what makes the audience to want to listen to you. There is a goal in your story. There is an attention grabber. There is a main character in your story. And there is an arch. Where is your story leading to? The people should be able to follow, to see like this story you're telling us is leading us to success, is leading us to pain. Hamed said there is no harm in saying a painful story. A painful story gives you a lesson and then actions to take. What action am I taking after the pain this person went through? Do I want to go through that kind of pain as well? No. So I need to sit back and think, what strategy am I supposed to take so that I don't take the same route? So to be able to write those good stories, what do? Start by reading other people's stories. When you read other people's story, you see the way they are crafted, you will know how to also write down your own story or how to tell your own story. Hamed earlier mentioned that there are some parts of your story that you don't tell. It's not every part of your story that you tell to everybody. There are some stories that you summarize on a particular forum, and other stories you say it on another audience because this audience needs this story. This one needs this other story. And the second thing to do is to be authentic. Be real in your story. Don't fake it, because the reality brings the emotions out of the people. And then be intentional in your daily life. If you are intentional in your daily life, you're going to capture each moment. Sometimes we maybe laugh at people. You take a lot of pictures, you don't enjoy the moments. Some of those people are actually capturing the moments. When something comes to your mind, for example, you are in a group of people, we are here. Capture the moments. You want to take the pictures. If there's something that comes to your mind about this specific day, the 14th, jot it down. You see, most people who have diaries, they have a lot of stories they have written down. I don't mean the diaries where we capture work like 14th of May, I have this meeting coming up. I don't mean that kind of a diary. There are some people who take their time at the end of each day and they write what happened today, they summarize it. Tomorrow, the same thing. Pick their diary 5 years later. When they are looking for something, they go back to their diary and they can tell you the stories that happened 5 years later. This is what I was doing on this particular day. So I think that to be able to craft good stories, be consistent, be authentic in your story, and then also know your audience. What kind of culture do I come from? Am I telling a cultural story that is going to resonate with a particular group of people? Or is it an international audience where I need to pick a story to share? Is it a story of love? Love stories can resonate with everybody. Pain stories can resonate with everybody. Freedom stories can resonate with everybody. So what kind of stories are you picking? So your audience as well tells you what stories to pick. I think, let me not take all the time again. That is the little I can say
Perfect.
on
Thank
this
you,
moment.
Mercy.
Back to you, Fadi.
I want to ask Promise the same question. How can we share compelling stories?
Thank you, Fadi. I think I will take it from where Messi left it. I think I like the way in which Messi broke it down about authenticity and you having a main character. But I'm gonna just share these three important elements that I feel like they're important in stories and make stories to be compelling. And then I'll share two examples of how I used that in my journey. Number one, there must be truth. Your stories must be about the truth. You must be able to talk about things that you feel like no one wants to talk about, but it's the truth. There must be emotion. Your audience must be able to connect with your story. If it's humor, we must feel the whole humor. If it's heartbreak, we must feel the heartbreak. And if it's joy, we must feel the joy. And lastly, there must be a vision. You must not leave us hanging. You must leave us with hope or with action. You don't just describe problems. You must imagine futures of how these are solutions. For example, I remember when we staged a theater play titled Sins of My Father. So basically how we do our staging, we would apply for national festivals, but before we would take a concept to a national festival, we would then showcase it to the grassroots communities. And most of these are people who in their lives would never get to see a professional theater production. And when we did Sins of My Father, which is a story that tells, it was inspired by real cases of domestic violence. And after one performance, I remember in the audience, a woman stood up and said, "Thank you for telling my story when I was afraid to." And that moment rippled through the community, and a lot of them then started going to the organizations or the groups that deal with these issues that we were working with, that we were partnering with, which was the awareness to tell people that these platforms exist. And all of a sudden, in the community where there was silent, and where silence was used as safety, now it was no longer like that anymore. There was solidarity. People knew that there was a place they could go to if they were facing such challenges. Another example is when there was a crisis in Zimbabwe, and there was a Cyclone Idai had rippled through the villages of Zimbabwe and left people stranded. I led the media team that was documenting the 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 giveaways that the University of Venda, which I'm attached to, was taking there as part of their relief mission to the people of the community. But I told the university that we shouldn't just deliver aid, because we got to understand the conversations that a lot of people were starting when we were asking them to help these people, that they are not understanding the situations that these people find themselves in. And what we then did when we got there was we captured and shared the stories of those who were affected. We showed people what their donations were doing to other people, and that created a cross border wave of empathy and donations. And even the community where the donations were taken, it felt seen. It felt like they were no longer visible, because now a lot of people understood their pain and they could see it, and they could then connect with it. So I feel if in our stories we can be intentional with the truth, we can make sure that we put an emotional element to it and share the vision, and not just deliver the story and share problems with people. We must imagine futures together.
Thank you, Promise. Hamid, I see you raised your hand. Uh,
As Promise was talking, and also like Messi as well, I was just thinking about like, sharing a bit of a strategy around telling compelling stories. And there's this model called the challenge choice outcome model by Marshall Gans, who is actually considered the father of storytelling. And the challenge is like, what challenge have you faced? Why is it your challenge? And how you structure or figure out what challenge have you faced, and what are the choices you've made because of that challenge. And based on those choices, what are the outcomes, right? What are the results of that story? Why do you want to inspire us? And how do you call us to action? So I just wanted to point that out, that, that's also another way to tell compelling stories. First, identify a challenge. What choice did you make, and what are the outcomes? And with that, you can actually curate or create a story narrative. And another thing is that most of the time, we used to think that we have to tell a story that we have lived, or we have to tell a story that we are living in currently. But sometimes you can tell the story of your imagination. So because most of the time we think about storytelling as something of the past, we think about storytelling as something of the present, but we don't think about storytelling as something of the future as well. And sometimes we need to think about the story of our imagination. Which world do you imagine? Which world do you aspire to? Which world do you want to create, for us? And I've been in an interview where I don't talk about my past stories or my present stories, but I talk about the story of the world I imagine. And and then kind of like create a picture and create a narrative of that story. So most of the time, when it seems that we don't have a story, or when it seems that, oh, we are out of stories, how do you tell a story of the world you imagine? How do you tell a story of the world you want to create? How do you tell a story of the the world, the imagination of the world? So I also wanted to like point that out as also like a way to tell stories as well.
Thank you very much. And I think utopian thinking, or thinking towards the future, there's a lot of research about it, how it empowers and drives collective action, because we tell the stories of the world we want to be in, what we aspire to. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think now maybe we're gonna move into the breakout rooms. Um, Maybe Cameron, you take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to move into breakout rooms for the next, let's say, 15 minutes or so. So Hamid, you will stay in the main room. Deborah, yourself, and myself will go together. Promise, you will go with Velina, and Mercy, you will go with Fadi. And this is an opportunity for you as participants who've been really engaged in the chat to ask some questions of our panelists and to have some conversations and to keep that spark going, I suppose, on the importance of storytelling. So, Caitlin, if you don't mind, you should see a notification pop up on your screen to join a room. If you need to come back for accessibility reasons or translation services, you can also leave the room or just say not now to that particular notification. So thank you all, folks, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes.
I guess I'm staying in this room, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Did I miss something? Am I moving to the room or I'm being assigned?
I can put you, do you see your name, Mercy?
Yes, I see my name on the main screen.
You can jump into, let me just, make sure you're, one sec, I can't find you. Okay, now you should have been invited to your room, if you see that.
Not yet.
Okay, let me just, and for folks that are sticking back with Hamid, feel free to start thinking about questions. Feel free to come off mute as we figure out how to get Mercy into her room. Let's see.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Please, feel free, contribution, questions, open to hearing your thoughts as well, and what you've been thinking as you've been listening to the stories and the reflections that we've been sharing. So yeah, who wants to go first? Question, reflection, contribution. Hello, can everybody hear me? Feel free to unmute if you wanna share as well. I don't know, I've not heard from anyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, feel free to put questions into the chat as well, folks, and we can address them. But I see about 10 people in this room, so
So I'm like trying to figure out who is in the room or who is not in the room because it might be confusing for some people. Um,
Patrick, Daniel, Nandini, Mercy, Sylvia, any thoughts, any questions that you want to pose to Hamed, David? And I just want to make sure Mercy got into her room. Okay, that's great.
um, Hi, Sylvia. I thought you were about to unmute. Can folks hear me okay? We actually have people like on the main room though, because I'm curious. It's difficult to tell on Zoom.
Hi, how you
Hello.
doing?
Yeah.
Oh, this is Sylvia. Sorry, I've been a bit distracted because I'm I'm dealing with children at home. Though I've been listening and very impressed to have been invited on this platform by my sister Mercy, and I love everything I have listened to so far. If I'm going to chip in anything very briefly, I picked up on creating stories or storytelling from imagination from you.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that's a specialty for me because imagination actually creates reality. Most
Mm,
of the stories we live originate from our thought patterns
mm,
because when you think it, you create it.
mhm,
So I'm very big on reality creation through imagination because before it actually even crystallizes in the physical, it must have taken place in the mind.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think if we as Africans in particular, I'm speaking from Nigeria, Abuja, or the world at large, we would love to see, better stories, on the positive side of things. If we would love to see more balance on the planet, if we would love to see more health, more wealth, more prosperity, and everything that resonates with our nature as human beings here,
mm,
I would like to uh, encourage that we look more on our thought patterns because basically everything that becomes us, what we become, we actually what we think in
mhm,
reality. What we are is what we think. Yeah. And we attract who we are. And
mhm,
who you are is actually just a sum total of your
mhm,
thoughts. What are you thinking during the day? Where
mhm,
is your mind? What are you paying attention to? What are you focusing on every present moment?
mhm,
So yeah, I think that's the only contribution I like to make. I would love to see, better stories across Africa, better stories across, especially Africa. And I'm actually really happy and glad that we can be on a forum like this to
mhm,
tell our own stories and to also learn how to craft these stories because the way you craft them is the way they are going to manifest. Yeah,
mhm,
and then it just continues, it goes on and on. It just creates that loop where everybody enjoys the entire story and everything. I think the universe is all about stories. Humans are all about stories. It's as if we came here on earth to just have a journey of making stories. So I'm very, very grateful that I was able to participate. This is my very first time to actually have heard of you guys. And I'm glad that I've learned a lot and that my contribution can also make an impact. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. And I think, lots of reflection there around, thoughts patterns and around, telling our story based on the story we tell ourselves. Because
Yes.
I think, one of the things that I've also learned in my journey is that people actually live what they tell themselves. So it's like, what story have you been telling yourself, right? Even though you've gone through a particular difficulty or a difficult moment, what story are you actually constantly telling yourself? Because you can constantly want to continue to tell yourself that story of hardship, right? And, without, bringing in, nuances into the stories, because I think stories also revolve around nuances. And most of the time, I feel like some of the reflection that I've been having recently is that when we start telling ourselves the story of failure and rejection, we forget the abundance along the journey. Because sometimes the stories are also in the process, like I've mentioned, and the abundance are found in the process. So for example, you've been rejected for a particular opportunity and you're thinking, okay, that's a rejection, right? And then you're sad, and then because of the outcome, you're like beating up yourself. But even before, you get to that point, you've actually written an application, you've submitted a draft, maybe you've been invited for an interview, you've not had the chance to be interviewed before. those are processes, those are stories already, and how do we take those stories of processes, even the story of rejection, how do we convert that into even a positive stories? Because, for example, there are many applications that I've done that I told the story of my rejection, that I told the story of my failure, that I told the story of a similar things that you might think that are not important, right? So, like you're saying, what are the stories we are telling ourselves? I think it's very, very important to actually, write and reclaim that narrative, to take our own courage back, to take our confidence back, and to tell, really, really good stories. So it was great to hear what you're sharing about story. But also I want to add something as well. I just remember that storytelling also revolves around their baggages that comes to telling our stories. You were mentioning about getting better stories from the continent, getting more people to share. So I saw a post recently about somebody saying that we need more people to share, we need more Nigerians to share, we need more successful people to share. And I'm like, actually, you are saying people should share, but there are also baggages that comes to sharing our stories as well. I personally have just taken it to continue to share, because whenever you share, you see the challenges of people reaching out to you, people asking for some sort of help that you can't even provide, and all of a sudden you're out there and you're struggling with that baggage as well. But again, like I said, what's the why of the storytelling? Why are we telling the story? I'm not telling the story because I know somebody would probably start leeching on me, but I'm telling the story because I know someone would feel inspired, and because of that, they will find courage to do things that they can't even imagine for themselves. So I just also want to point out that nuances as well, and the challenge with telling our stories in between, Sylvia. I don't know if we have more reflection or more questions as well. Again, I'm very, very open to contribution. So if there's anybody in the group who have a question, please kindly share. Daniel, David, Abdullah, Dorita, and Nandine.
I have a question if people need some time, but I'll wait. I hear something. Is someone trying to speak quietly? Maybe not. I guess my question is, in a lot of places, like coming from the US context, there's a dichotomy in narratives, and there's a very split, um, there's a split like audience right now. And so I'm wondering how you might recommend using storytelling to bring people that aren't already predisposed to or already bought in to kind of your narrative. Like, how do you reach across the aisle with storytelling and really bring people who are very far from maybe where you might be in terms of experience and ideology, kind of like talking about the misinformation
Mhm.
issues. Like, yeah, what would be some tactics that you would recommend?
Um, I think it's connecting the story to the issue we're all facing. So, because again, when it comes to, even conflict, it's not me against you, it's we against a particular issue, right? So for example, it's us against, quality healthcare, for example. It's both of us against, poverty, for example, if that's the case, right? It's us against good leadership, for example. We all want somebody who represent us, for example. So it's like that, story around a particular issue that is being shared. And I think that's where crossing the line of differences now comes from, where you get to listen to a story, where you get to listen to other people's story, even though they disagree with us, what stories are you telling? And by hearing that story of disagreements, then we are finding the meeting points or the middle ground in the way to now tell that narrative and to tell that story. Because I think there's actually power in, in shared story. There's power in telling, for example, again, I'll use Nigeria as an example. I'm from Nigeria, and obviously people will tell you so many bad things about Nigeria, but I'll tell you that there are also good stuff as well, right? And then I'll bring in all of those stories that I'm not shying away from these challenges we face as a nation, or I'm not shying away from these challenges we face as a community. But this is what I'm finding in hope. It is, a young woman in California who did this and this and this. It is a young person in Michigan who did this and this. So it is like connecting those stories together and finding a way to connect and share our stories together as well. And I think for me, that's one of the ways that I like it works like magic when you just like kind of like just bring stories like that, shared stories together, that it's not about red and white today. It's not about blue and red. It's not about blue state and red states. It's us like fighting for the common ground, common enemy, common like it's just finding that connection and being able to tell that story. For example, I think there was a time I was saying that I'm in Nigeria. I'm a Nigerian first before anything else, and the whole idea is to tell that story of nationalism, like tell that story of like being Nigerians, that I've met Nigerians, even though they are like Igbos or they are like Hausas, the way they treated me when I visited them, the way they like, and then I told the story from that perspective. And every single person, even though they share different culture from myself, were able to connect to that story as well. So I think, there's that power of like understanding that differences in the story and finding a middle ground to actually tell powerful stories. Thanks. That was a good question. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an amazing answer. I appreciate it. I see that Fadia's might have joined back into the main room.
Yes.
I think we're all back now, Caitlin.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed the breakout rooms and we got to share our stories on a smaller, more intimate virtual space. Thank you so much. And now, if there is anything else you would like to address or share, or any thoughts, any final thoughts before we close off the conversation today.
And just while you're doing that, I'm just going to share my screen just with the QR code here for our survey. It will shortly be in the chat as well, so you have the link. If you wouldn't mind just taking some time to fill out this form, this feedback form for us. It's really important that we get a sense of what works, what doesn't for the webinars, how you might want to be involved, how you might want to improve the series as well, but also it gives us an insight into your understanding of each of the topics. So if you are able to scan that QR code, and very quickly, very soon, I'm just sending the link to Caitlin now to post into the chat. Should be there. Just if you don't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it.